This video is sponsored by Mistplay. Do you like games? Trick question, I know you do. If you're like me, you like playing games of all types on all your platforms, including on your phone. That's where Mistplay comes in. Mistplay is a loyalty app that serves several purposes. It introduces you to all kinds of mobile games to download and play, but more importantly, you can earn rewards for simply discovering and playing games through Mistplay. You find a game that looks interesting, click on download, play it for a bit, earn points, and exchange them for gift cards. It's that simple. I personally am partial to puzzle games or speed challenges on my phone and have really enjoyed playing games like Triple Tile or Cooking Madness, which I wouldn't have even discovered, much less earned points for, without Mistplay. So if you're playing mobile games anyway, do yourself a favor and check out Mistplay. Go to mistplay.com/bandit or click the link in the description below to download Mistplay for free and receive 200 bonus points for signing up today. And be sure to use my code BANDIT50 inside the app for an additional 50 free points, which goes a long way towards a gift card. For more details, see the description below. And now on to the video. Raise your hand if you like The Legend of Zelda. Are you raising your hand? I can't actually tell. There's a lot to love about the franchise, from the characters to the monsters to the medieval fantasy setting. But what typically goes hand in hand with medieval fantasy settings is the existence of knights and castles and kings. And Zelda has no shortage of knights or castles or, for the purpose of this video, kings. And although the kings of Hyrule are rarely focused on in the games, leading to most fans not really knowing all that much about them, they do each have their own stories and impact on the franchise as a whole, sometimes even having influences on the story that are so strong that they directly lead to the events of entire games. They all typically appear as the father of the princesses of Hyrule, all known as Zelda, and act as the heads of the royal family of Hyrule, who are typically associated very closely with the protection of the sacred relics such as the Triforce and the Ocarina of Time. Another interesting fact that's true of all Hylian kings is that they're never shown with their wives, the queens of Hyrule. Well, all except for the latest king that we were shown, King Rauru, but he doesn't really count because he's a Zonai, so technically he's the king of Hyrule, but not a Hylian himself. Anyway, without further ado, let's explain each and every one of the known Hylian kings one by one. Oh yeah, and spoiler alert, obviously. As you know if you've been here for a bit, I typically try to group the individuals being explained in my lore videos by their similarities for easier scripting and understanding and whatnot. But for the kings of Hyrule, I'm just going to cover them from the oldest to the newest, according to the canon timeline itself. Which means that we will be starting with the two kings referenced in the game The Minish Cap, which is the first game on the timeline that takes place in the kingdom of Hyrule. The first king of Hyrule that we know of from any of the games is King Gustaf, who is not among the living anymore by the events of the Minish Cap. In life, he was a friend to the mysterious Wind Tribe, and long after his death even comes back as a spirit to guide Minish Cap Link on his quest, giving him his gold kinstone piece, which enables Link to access the Wind Tribe and therefore find the Wind Element, therefore enabling him to, save the world. There isn't much more to be said about this ancient king other than the fact that he clearly was a good man and ruler, since his good nature even brought him back in undeath to help save the world from evil. He's also the ancestor to both the current Princess Zelda and the current king of Hyrule, who is the next up to talk about. At the time that the events of the game take place, the current king of Hyrule is known as King Daltus, the descendant of King Gustaf. Daltus has a much more active role in the game than most of the other kings of Hyrule do. He's first seen at the beginning of the game announcing the winner of the sword fighting tournament, which, fun fact, he once competed in himself and would have won if his final opponent wasn't an equal match in skill, making the tournament end in a draw. And that opponent just so happens to be his old friend Smith, also known as Link's grandpa. Anyway, he announces the winner of the tournament, who just so happens to be Vati, the evil wizard, who knocks the king away, shatters the Picori blade, and turns Zelda to stone. After this, the king and Smith kind of spearhead the planning for what to do next and decide to send Link out on this quest because the Picori need to be contacted to aid in the mess and repair the Picori blade, and only children can see or interact with them. And Link just so happens to be a literal child. So what could go wrong? Later on in the game, the king is imprisoned by Vati, who secretly replaces him by shape-shifting into him and ruling in his stead, which some people noticed led to the quote-unquote king acting differently. Meanwhile, the real King Daltus was turned to stone himself and imprisoned within the dungeon of Dark Hyrule Castle, but is eventually rescued by Link via the power of the Picori blade, which is now known as the Four Sword. He doesn't show up again in the game after this, but with Link eventually going on to defeat Vati and seal the Dark Wizard away, and with King Daltus being rescued from his stone imprisonment, it can pretty safely be assumed that he also regained his proper status as King of Hyrule and set things back in order before eventually likely passing away of old age. There's no mention of a King of Hyrule existing in the next Zelda game Four Swords, so we'll just continue on to the next Zelda game, the iconic Ocarina of Time. We never actually see this era's King of Hyrule in-game, but we know he exists because other characters reference him directly, although we don't ever get to know what his name is. Well, actually maybe we do, but I'll get to that theory a bit later on. Unlike the previous King Daltus, this king made two royal blunders that nearly doomed the entire world, but I'll get to those in a second. Just like all the other kings of Hyrule until that point, he also served as the head of the royal family and guarded the secrets of the sacred realm. Physically, apparently, he was very handsome, according to this love-struck lady dancing with her significant other who compares his handsomeness to the king's. Politically, he was a good and fair leader who strived for peace. As some of you may know, just before the events of Ocarina of Time, there was a brutal Hyrulean civil war that plagued the land and cost many lives, both Hylian and not. According to the Deku Tree Sprout, it was the King of Hyrule himself who united the country once again. He made or maintained alliances with the other races such as the Zora and the Gorons, with Gaebora the Owl claiming that the Zora served the King of Hyrule, and the leader of the Gorons known as Darunia even referring to the King of Hyrule as his sworn brother. And it's also possible that he was the king responsible for putting an end to the dark, bloody, torturous activities done in service to the royal family that occurred beneath the Kakariko graveyard within the Shadow Temple, although that's not confirmed and could have also been a previous king. Either way, he undoubtedly was a ruler who strived for peace and prosperity for all, and was even in the process of making peace with the desert-dwelling Gerudo tribe, although that is actually one of the blunders that he made that I referenced earlier. He trusted and accepted the King of the Gerudo's proclamation of fealty to the royal family of Hyrule even against his own daughter's counsel, who claimed that she had had a dream warning against the man with the evil eyes, and not listening to his daughter was his second royal blunder. These two mistakes together led to the Gerudo thief usurping the throne of Hyrule and betraying the king, and after this point there's no other mention of him in the game, meaning he was likely imprisoned. I would say he might have been executed, but according to the backstory of A Link to the Past, the King of Hyrule was around to command the Seven Sages to seal Ganon away within the Sacred Realm after he defeated Link, which of course implies that he was still alive. Also, as a side note, this does mean that the next King of Hyrule was technically Ganondorf Dragmire himself. But there is so much story behind this one man that I could literally make an entire other video just dedicated to explaining it all. And that's exactly what I did. So if you're interested in hearing the story of the usurper king of Hyrule, Ganondorf, be sure to check out this video, which I will link in the description below. At the end of the game, Princess Zelda actually splits the timeline into two, leading to Link returning to his lost original timeline before the king accepted the offer of peace from Ganondorf, and allowing Link to join forces with the princess in warning the King of Hyrule to not trust the allegiance of the Gerudo, which apparently was successful and led to Ganondorf's execution. Attempted execution, I mean. The guy is kind of stubborn, okay? Anyway, in the child timeline, we have no reason to assume Ocarina of Time's King of Hyrule met any other kind of end other than old age. So at least one of his existences truly was peaceful. There's not a single reference to any King of Hyrule for the remainder of the child timeline, so we're going to move over to the adult timeline. The next King of Hyrule would be Wind Waker's King Daphnes Nohansen Hyrule, the last King of Hyrule. He's also clearly the coolest King of Hyrule because he can turn into a boat called the King of Red Lions, which is pretty metal. Well, okay, technically he just takes possession of the boat by haunting it, but that's still metal as hell. For those who don't know, the setting of Wind Waker takes place long after the ancient land of Hyrule was flooded and buried deep beneath the ocean. This was due to the return of Ganondorf, who plagued the land of Hyrule once again, but was not met with a hero to stop him for reasons. This led King Daphnes to attempt to use his own power to stop Ganondorf, but when he realized he was outclassed, he, along with the people of Hyrule, prayed to the gods for salvation and left their fate in their divine hands, which led the gods to committing genocide and flooding the entire world. But before they did that, they did warn a select few chosen people to repopulate the new world above the waves and allowed them time to escape to the mountaintops. King Daphnes knew about this, but he himself was not one of these chosen people. However, his daughter, the Princess Zelda at the time, was, and before she escaped to a mountaintop, he split the Triforce of Wisdom into two pieces and gave one to Zelda, keeping the other for himself. The king then remained down in Hyrule as it was sealed away. until a few centuries later when Ganondorf once again, returned, this time on the surface of the New World. At this point, the gods reawakened King Daphnes' ghost to return from the dead and possess the King of Red Lions in order to seek out both the new hero and the descendant of the royal family, also known as Zelda, also known as the Pirate Queen Tetra. And he does just that, locating Link and aiding him on his quest, speaking ancient Hylian whenever necessary and revealing to Tetra her true identity as Princess Zelda, keeper of the Triforce of Wisdom. He then aids Link in his quest to restore the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Courage and even shows up for the final battle against Ganondorf down in Old Hyrule, where he steals Ganondorf's thunder right before he got what he had spent the last few centuries wanting, and becomes one of the only characters across the entire franchise who is shown to successfully make a wish upon the Triforce. And that wish is to permanently drown Hyrule once again and create a new, brighter, and better future for the next generation. After Ganondorf is defeated once more and turned to stone, his descendant asks him if he would come with them, but he reveals that deep down, he and Ganondorf were the same person. Neither of those old foes could let Hyrule go, and so he decides to stay underneath the waves, but this time forever. Now, there are a couple theories to mention regarding Daphnes Nohansen which are not proven, but are very interesting nonetheless, and can be believed if you so choose to. The first of which is the theory that he was instrumental in creating a second Master Sword, which is the one Link uses in Wind Waker. It's a whole thing though, so there will be a link to that video also in the description if you're interested. The second theory was brought up to me by my good buddy and Discord mod Ran, the Lon historian, and it reveals the possibility that King Daphnes Nohansen Hyrule actually is the king from Ocarina of Time. This is speculative of course, but if you look at the portrait of the old Princess Zelda within Hyrule Castle, you can see that she doesn't have the same design as the current Princess Tetra. Instead, get this. The old Zelda is pictured wearing the exact same headpiece, armor, gloves, tabard, and even the pink dress that Zelda from Ocarina of Time wore, implying very heavily that this is in fact that Zelda, Ocarina Zelda. And with this being an Ocarina of Time portrait and the statue of Link present within the castle being the hero of time also from Ocarina of Time, it would make sense that the Ocarina of Time imagery would then carry over to the portrait of King Daphnes located here. If this is true, and King Daphnes is the very same king that once made a mistake in trusting Ganondorf's promise of fealty, it makes the struggle between Ganondorf and the old king much more impactful, and makes their joined destinies that end together once and for all down in Old Hyrule one of the most poetic things I've ever heard. But like I said, you can believe that way or not if you so choose to. As you could guess, following this game, Hyrule is officially forgotten about, and New Hyrule is instead founded some years later by Link and Tetra. Even though New Hyrule still has a royal family and a Princess Zelda, there's no mention of a king of New Hyrule anywhere. Which doesn't mean there weren't kings of New Hyrule, but it does end our coverage of the adult timeline here. Over in the Fallen timeline, the first game that takes place is A Link to the Past, and one of the first things it shows is a dead king. Yep, there's his bones. On his throne. The story behind this though is that after the events of Ocarina of Time, when Ganon kills Link instead of the other way around, Ganon gets sealed away within the Sacred Realm by the command of the current king of the time, which again was possibly King Daphnes Nohansen Hyrule. A long time later though, as Hyrule had forgotten all about Ganon and the Triforce and was prospering under the reign of this unnamed king, strange misfortunes began to take place like fires and earthquakes, to the point to where the king tried all the known magics of the world to stop it, but to no avail. He then issued a reward for anyone who could figure out how to stop these plagues, which led to the evil wizard Aghanim stepping forth and quieting all the misfortunes with previously unseen magic. The king was delighted and immediately promoted the wizard and his unknown magics to the second highest position in the land, advisor to the king. Yeah, blind trust is apparently something the kings of Hyrule all have in common. The wizard's true identity, however, was none other than Ganon's alter ego, and his intentions were actually to destroy the seal on the Sacred Realm, releasing Ganon into the world once again. To accomplish this, he deceived the king into finding and retrieving the descendants of the 7 sages known as the Maidens. But before he got to the final maiden, the Princess Zelda herself, he straight up killed her father the king as he sat upon his throne. Obviously, the king doesn't do much in the game after this, but he does have a happy ending though. At the end of the game, Link defeats Ganon and retrieves the full Triforce, making a wish upon it to right all the wrongs that Ganon had managed to accomplish, one of which was the killing of the King of Hyrule. This wish brings the king and even Link's uncle back to life, and they assumedly live happily ever after. The next time a king is mentioned is all the way in Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, which takes place at the end of the Fallen timeline, although the king that's talked about in this game is from long before the events of the game, likely placing this king between the events of A Link Between Worlds and the original Legend of Zelda. His tomb can be found in the game, but most of his story actually comes from the game's official manual, which explains the backstory. In the backstory of Link's adventure, we learn that this also unnamed king was father to both a son and a daughter named, you guessed it, Zelda, and ruled over the land of Hyrule with the full power of the unified Triforce at his disposal, which he is said to have mastered. Actually, it's said that there was a long line of kings that all used the Triforce in order to preserve order in the land, which is why I believe this backstory most likely took place after A Link Between Worlds. Anyway, at the end of his reign, as he anticipated his death, however, he realized that his son, the heir to the throne, was unworthy of the Triforce's power, and that it would likely cause the land to fall to evil if inherited, which complicated things. Because of this, he split the Triforce into power, wisdom, and courage, leaving power and wisdom within the kingdom itself, but hiding courage away within the great palace in the distant Valley of Death. The king also hand-picked the monsters that would guard the final piece from intruders and cast a powerful spell over the entire land of Hyrule that would automatically find whoever is deemed worthy of the Triforce and cause a Triforce symbol to appear on their hand, marking them as the king's chosen to reclaim the Triforce of Courage. Before he died, he told all of this to one person only, his daughter Zelda. However, he probably should have told his son at least something, because once the prince became king and was supposed to inherit the Triforce, the guy kind of freaked out when he couldn't find the final piece and was told by a random mysterious magician, very reminiscent of Agony, that the king had actually told his sister Zelda where the final piece was, which was true. It's also unknown how the magician knew this, but either way, this led to both the prince and the magician ganging up on Zelda, trying to force her to tell them where the final piece was hidden. But Zelda did not give in and refused to betray her father's trust. Then the magician cast an eternal slumber spell on the princess, which made the Prince King freak out even more because he was like, dude, that's way too far, which prompted him to try to stop the magician, but to no avail. And after the spell was cast, the magician falls down dead. The Prince King was so regretful and distraught at his actions leading to his sister's eternal slumber that he placed her inside a room that only the Sheikah could open, and decreed that from that time onward, every female born into the royal family would be named Zelda in order to never forget the tragedy. This account is referred to as the Legend of Zelda. At the time of the game's events, it's unknown if a current king is ruling over the land, as there is never any reference to royalty other than the princess herself in both Zelda 1 and 2, which ends our coverage of the kings of the known Zelda timeline. But that's not the end of the kings of Hyrule. As you know, perhaps the two most famous kings of the land have come from the two latest Zelda games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. However, it is still unknown how the games existing within the era of the Wild are connected to the canon timeline, if at all. So I saved them for last and will not really be referencing any of the previous franchise lore when explaining their stories. The first king of the Wild and last king of Hyrule to date would be King Rhoam Bosphoramus Hyrule, who was also the first person Link talks to after waking up from his 100-year nap. If there's one thing to be said about Rhoam, it's that he made a better leader than a father, and more on that in a second. Not much is known of his marriage to the Queen or his early life before Zelda's birth, but once his daughter was born, he decided to name her Zelda, in keeping with the royal tradition, and to also begin writing in a journal, which is fortunate for us lore delvers. He also just directly tells Link plenty of his own story with regards to Hyrule's destruction 100 years ago, and Link is able to unlock his own memories of the king through placing himself in familiar environments across the land. From what we can gather, the king was a fine ruler who wanted the best for his people. He was told by a mysterious fortune teller that the ancient demon, Calamity Ganon, would one day soon return, and that the power to oppose this evil lies dormant beneath the ground. With this being the king's primary focus, he immediately ordered large excavations of the land across Hyrule, which directly led to the unearthing of hundreds of Sheikah constructs such as the Guardians and the giant divine beasts. With these clearly being weapons of mass destruction, the king ordered the Sheikah to research the ancient technologies and attempt to get them up and running, which caught the attention of his young daughter Princess Zelda, who according to the king had a knack for research, even when she was less than 6 years old. Around the same time, he and his researchers discovered that there was once a princess with a sacred power who appointed a knight chosen by the Master Sword, and that together this ancient duo, and only this duo, was able to seal away the calamity. And just as he began to realize that salvation for the people of Hyrule through their princess was once again made manifest in his own daughter, his wife, the queen, passed away suddenly. At this time, Zelda was only 6, and according to his journal, her father expressed concern regarding his ability to raise her into her difficult future as the princess of Hyrule, now that her mother and teacher had passed away. This is where he began to make certain decisions that have garnered not a small amount of hatred from the fanbase towards his character. He began to force Zelda to train to hone her sacred powers. According to his journal, he even had her traveling to the fountain at the age of 7 in an attempt to unlock her powers, expressing a regret in pushing her so hard and a fatherly desire to ease up on her and tell her to just take her time, but admitting that with the doom of the entire world hanging above his head, as king, he felt he had no choice but to order his beloved daughter to train relentlessly. After 10 whole years of fruitless training, tensions between the king and his daughter were at an all-time high, and even more to Zelda's dismay, the king appointed a young knight of her same age to her side, who just so happened to have gone and drawn the Master Sword a few years prior, making him a clear candidate for, the knight chosen by the Master Sword. He also appointed 4 notable warriors of the races of Hyrule to, together with Zelda and her knight, form the champions, and each mastered the control of a divine beast. Zelda was appointed the leader of the champions, and at this point, all of the pieces of the prophecy were coming together, all except for one, the sealing power of Princess Zelda. This led the king to believe in his desperation that it was her focus on research that was keeping her from focusing and unlocking the final piece of the prophecy and saving everyone's lives. And so, the events of the infamous father and daughter memory took place, which entailed Rhoam confronting Zelda about her research on her day off, very sternly and very strictly, officially forbidding her to have anything to do with the Sheikah technologies until she unlocked her power. And truly, watching this scene is painful. All it accomplished was to further frustrate, embarrass, and stress the princess, who was still ultimately unable to unlock her powers even after all this time. The king then wrote in his journal that he understands his daughter's feelings and that his heart breaks for what she's going through. He also would love nothing more than to console her, but he believes that to be weakness and perseveres in his heart to quote-unquote stay strong and push her, even if it means she comes to despise him. On his daughter's 17th birthday, she finally embarks to the Spring of Wisdom, and the king admits that this is the last-ditch attempt to unlock her powers and that he has full intentions on removing this burden from his daughter should this final chance once again prove fruitless. He also had plans on allowing her to return to her research, and that, after 10 years of a strained relationship, he just wanted to see his daughter return, not as her king, but as her father. Little did he know, though, that when she left for the spring on her 17th birthday, that would have been the last time he ever saw his beloved daughter. As she descended from Mount Lanayru, Calamity Ganon awoke suddenly from deep beneath Hyrule Castle, immediately capturing every Sheikah construct and killing thousands of Hylians, her father included. Zelda still loved her father deeply, and the knowledge that her power not unlocking led to his death further weighed on her conscience. It's a wonder that she didn't break completely. However, as you know, just as she was about to lose the last person who also meant the most to her, Link, her powers awoke within her at that very moment, and she was able to save his life by commanding a couple remaining Sheikah to transport him to the Shrine of Resurrection, after which the princess headed to the castle and used her power to confine the Calamity within Hyrule Castle indefinitely, awaiting the return of the night. The king might have been killed by the Calamity, but his regretful spirit lingered on in the world, waiting for 100 years living off the land of the Great Plateau surrounding the Shrine of Resurrection, disguised as a mysterious unnamed old man, in order to softly explain the story of what happened and guide Link to the castle. But this time, he didn't primarily ask Link to save Hyrule. Instead, this is what he says.
I have no right to ask this of you, Link. But I am powerless here. You must save her, my daughter, and do whatever it takes to annihilate Ganon.
In his death, he finally was more father than king. The last tie to the living world he had was simply to see his daughter saved and alive. And in the end, though he was unable to ever speak with her again, as was his punishment for his treatment of his daughter, he was finally able to see that she would be saved by Link, that his daughter would be okay. And this relief is what allows King Rhoam Bosphoramus Hyrule, the last king of Hyrule, to finally move on from this world. It's also probably a good thing that he moved on here and didn't linger on for a few more years, because then he would have seen, something a bit worse happen. The final king of Hyrule to discuss is also the first king of Hyrule, or the first king of the refounding of Hyrule. It's literally not clear which that is as per the creators of the games themselves, so I'm not going to weigh in on it here, but according to the word of Rauru himself, he is the king who founded Hyrule an unknown amount of millennia ago, long before the 10,000-year-old calamity. As you might have noticed, he's not Hylian. He's actually a Zonai, one of the two remaining members of the mysterious race that chose to live with the Hylians, the other of which is his scientist older sister, Minoru. He married a Hylian priestess known as Sonia who possessed power over time, and together they founded the Kingdom of Hyrule, and traveled around the land destroying various evil demons, placing shrines of light above where a demon was destroyed so that their demonic magic would dispel and prevent the demon from reappearing, according to a brand new interview from the director. I know, right? Like, what's with Nintendo dropping lore in interviews these days? Anyway, they were also the ancestors to the current Princess Zelda, though we never see their child or children before Sonia gets killed by Ganondorf. We just kind of have to assume they're running around somewhere. Due to time shenanigans, Zelda is transported back in time upon picking up Rauru's secret stone and meets her ancestors face to face, living with them and telling them about how the Kingdom of Hyrule is in the future and what a cute, capable knight this young man known as Link is. Through Zelda's memories, which we can see because she cries them out because she's a dragon because she ate her secret stone, we can see that Rauru was a good and just king who also, again, ignored Zelda's advice and believed Ganondorf when he swore a false oath of fealty to the Hyrulean king, not knowing that the previous wave of Molduga that he was able to put down pretty easily was actually an attack from Ganondorf in an attempt to overthrow Hyrule. Albeit a pretty pathetic attempt. Also, this is another Ganondorf entirely, just wanted to throw that out there. We'll call him Bad Intentions Ganondorf. Bad Intentions Ganondorf sees this Zonai secret stone that Rauru used to shoot a big laser and decides that he'll create a Phantom Ganon under the guise of a fake Princess Zelda in order to lure Queen Sonia out and kill her, taking the secret stone for himself, which is successful. Rauru becomes angered at this and grabs some extra secret stones to give to notable warriors of other races of Hyrule in order to power them up as sages, and, ignoring Zelda's advice yet again, decides to face Ganondorf in combat alongside his sages, claiming that if all this fails, they'll leave his fate in the hands of that cute, capable knight Zelda is always talking about. Bad Intentions Ganondorf, now known as the Demon King, defeats every single one of Rauru's sages, even though they vastly outnumbered him, which is pretty badass. And in a last attempt to stop Ganondorf from his bad intentions, Rauru pulls a fast one, sneaks up on Ganondorf, grabs his chest, and uses his own body as a shrine of light, dispelling the Demon King's magic for as long as it takes. And this is where he stays, all the way to the present day. Hyrule Castle is said to have been built around the sealing chamber that housed Rauru and Ganondorf and acted as a seal on the seal itself. But after Calamity Ganon shook the castle up via the events of Breath of the Wild, the seal was weakened, leading to Ganondorf's power returning and Rauru's power weakening. And just as his power dwindles away, leaving only his arm left, Link and Zelda discover the bodies. Zelda receives his stone, and what's left of Rauru saves Link from falling to his death, carrying him up into the Sky Islands that have been up here the whole time, just hidden behind the cloud barrier, and binding his arm to Link's, which had gotten pretty messed up after his encounter with Ganondorf. Here, Rauru's spirit guides Link while he adventures across the Great Sky Island, granting his arm new abilities every time he completes a shrine, similarly to Rhoam's spirit in Breath of the Wild. Once Link has claimed 4 Lights of Blessing from the Shrines of Light around the island, Rauru tells Link that he's exactly what Zelda always said he was, refuses to elaborate, and disappears, for now. After Link restores the destroyed Master Sword and joins forces with the Light Dragon, also known as Zelda, to defeat the Demon Dragon, also known as Bad Intentions Ganondorf, the spirits of Rauru and Sonia appear once again to reverse the draconification of Zelda with time and heal Link's arm with light. And once this is accomplished, the couple moves on once and for all and disappears from this world for good, confident that Hyrule is now in good hands with Link and Zelda as its protectors. Given that they survived this fall, of course. Really, they couldn't place them on the ground. Fortunately though, there was this puddle here which allowed them to survive this fall. Somehow, so, all is well. And that wraps up the complete list of every canonical king of Hyrule mentioned across the entire franchise. Did you know every detail? Did I miss something? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and really, thank you for 2023. It was a slower year on the channel due to certain reasons, but there's a whole bunch of content planned for a whole bunch of other franchises, Zelda included. So as the year comes to a close, make sure you're subscribed to stick around for all of it in 2024 and forward. And if you would be so kind, please consider leaving a like on this video if you enjoyed watching it, or at least my efforts into making it. Huge thanks as always to my bandit crew, of which I have a new name to announce. Say hello to Aldebaran Crows, who just joined up. Seriously, my bandit crew makes my day every day and is the reason I can continue with the channel. So thank you all so much. That's all I've got for this one, so be sure to follow me on my socials, and I'll see you next year. This is Bandit, wishing you a happy new year, and signing out. Peace!